Hi, I'm Andrea, and today I'm going to teach you how to make pivot tables in Excel, and this is geared toward beginners who have never done this before. So let's first look at our data set, and this is for someone, the data is multiple brokerage accounts with different types, with market value, cost basis, the gain dollar amount, gain percentage, what was the percentage of the market value of that particular account, and the percentage of all of your accounts. So you'll see each row is a different line item. So this account is a taxable account. The type of this security is a stock. It's Amazon. The name is Amazon. There's 2 shares. This is the price per share, market value, cost basis, etc. So then this line is the total for this account. Then the next account is the Roth IRA. Lists all of the holdings in that account for a total. Then a SEP IRA, their holdings, and a couple work 401ks. And then a total for all of the accounts with that information. So this would not really be an ideal way to make a pivot table because you have all of these blank rows. So what I would typically do is, if this was my initial data set, I made a copy of this tab, so it's called Data 2, and I deleted all of the rows that were blank. So let's do that. So if I right-click on this Data tab, say Move or Copy, you can click Create a Copy, and I just pick where I want that sheet to be, so we'll just move it to the end. So now you'll see Data 3, so this is a duplicate of that Data tab. So what I'm going to do is just delete all of the headings in the blank rows so that I keep all of my lines and my total columns, because there's a formula for that column for the percentage of account. So I need to keep that total in there. So let's delete all of these. So I'm just holding down the Control key and highlighting with my mouse the rows that I'm going to delete. So you'll see all of these that are highlighted, and then a shortcut to delete the rows is Control and then minus sign on your keyboard. So it automatically just deleted all of those. I missed a couple here. Okay. So another important thing to know about pivot tables is if you have any columns with no titles, so for example, I just added in column F, and a shortcut to do that is Control plus sign. And then to delete the columns, Control minus sign. So I have a blank column in here now. So when I go to make a pivot table, it's going to give me an error. So to make a pivot table, start anywhere on your data set and click on Insert and then Pivot Table. And it's going to ask me what range my table is. So it'll typically guess, and it's going to start from the top left corner of that data until where you have blanks and go all the way down until where it ends. So as you can see, it's stopping here. So I can hold my mouse and reselect what range I want it to be. And you'll see that I'm going to get an error. So that's what I want. And then it's asking me here where I want that pivot table to be. So if I want it on a new worksheet, or if I want to pick a tab, an existing tab, and tell it where to go. So we'll just say new worksheet, and it's going to make a new tab. So we say OK. It's going to tell me the pivot table field name is not valid. So the reason that you're going to get that error is because you have this column that doesn't have a heading. So with pivot tables, it needs a title in every single top row. So if we delete this column and now make our pivot table, so if you were on the Home tab, go to Insert and top left corner pivot table, and now you'll see it automatically selected the right range. If we scroll down, it has its dots all the way around that, and we'll say new worksheet is fine. We'll say OK. So now we have a new tab called Sheet 5. That's telling me this is my new pivot table. So now I'm going to decide what I want to organize. So I'm basically taking all of that data and I want to organize it in some way. So how do I want to organize it? So you can make as many pivot tables as you want. You can change as many times as you want. So let's start with I want to basically look at, if we go back to the data set real quick, in account type, I have taxable accounts and then retirement accounts. So for our first pivot table, let's say I want to know how much I have in taxable accounts versus retirement accounts. So let's go back to our sheet 5 where our pivot table is. So I'm going to say account type is how I want to organize the data. So I just hold my mouse down right here. I'm on the field table. So I hold my mouse down on the box that I want, and then I drag it down here to which of the 4 sections that I want. So row labels is how is what's going to be on your left-hand side. So I'm going to drop this in that box, and now it's telling me these are my labels. So retirement account and then taxable account. And then what is it that I want to add up? So I want to look at the market value totals, cost basis, and let's do gain and loss. So I'm going to hold down my mouse on market value and drag that to here. And then let's do cost basis. And let's do gain and loss. So you'll see it automatically added up how many times those things occurred, which I don't want to know how many times they occurred. I want to know the sum of them. So if I click on this drop down box on each of these values, I'm going to change the value field setting. So it asks me if I want to count them, if I want to add the sum, the average, tell me the max, the minimum. So I'm going to change this to sum for all 3 of these columns that I want. I'm going to change this one to sum. And then I'm going to change this value field settings to sum. And then, as you can see, it doesn't put in any commas, which I don't like that. So I'm going to highlight these columns. And then right here on the Home tab where this comma is, just click commas. And then I don't need to see the decimals, so I'm going to backspace on those. So then also on your row labels, those blank columns was my total column, so I don't need those. So I'm going to uncheck this box because I don't want that. And I just basically want my retirement account and my taxable account. So this is now telling me the total market value of my retirement accounts is $316,000. The cost basis for that was $266,000, and this is my gain. And then compared to my taxable accounts, this would be the totals. So if I took a screenshot of this and compare it to that tab, so we can put them side by side. Now if I go back to my data tab, so my taxable account, this is the only taxable account that I have. So the total market value was $28,000. Bring my screenshot back up. And my taxable account market value was 28. The cost basis was 25, and the gain was 3, which you'll see these 3 numbers here, 28, 25, and 3. So all this is doing is basically summarizing information for you in a particular way that you choose. So see this column here, column C is by type. So the 3 types were stocks, ETFs, and cash. So maybe I want to know how much I have in those 3 types. So if I go back to my sheet 5, instead of by account type, maybe I want to know the type. So I'm going to drag that over. So again, I'm going to filter out these blanks in the type. I don't need those. 1 second. Okay, so I filtered out those I didn't need. And now I'm seeing the total of my market value, my cost basis, and my sum of the gain or loss by these types, because those are the 3. That's what I decided to have be my row labels, was the type. If you ever change the data here, say I change this right here from stock to say cash. Now I want to go back to my data, my pivot table, and update that information. I can right click on anywhere on the pivot table and say refresh, and it'll update the data. Or if I need to say I added more rows to my data, say here, let's copy this and we'll add it in a bunch of times. So now my data set is now this many rows longer, whereas my pivot table is not going to change that unless I tell it to. So I can right click on the pivot table. If I say refresh, it's not going to add in those additional lines, but if I go to my pivot table tools at the top and go to options, I can either refresh here, which I just showed you, you could right click on the pivot table and do that, or you can change the data source. So that's what I want to do here. So now it's taking me back to my data source and it automatically knew to add in all of those extra rows. So we're going to say okay, and now it would add in all of those. Or if I wanted to change it and maybe I only want it to be these, you just click on your mouse wherever you want the data to start and highlight the selection that you want. And then you let go of your mouse when you're done selecting the area and say okay. I'm just going to go back and delete all of those additional rows, so we don't need them. And change this back to stock. Go back to my pivot table so I can click on options and refresh. And you'll see those numbers just changed. So maybe now, maybe I want to, so if I go back to my data, there's some accounts that I have the same holding in. So like I have QQQ in this account and this account. So maybe I want to add up my data by my symbol, which was my, what's the name of the stock. So I'm going to take my type away for now. So to take it back, I just click on it here and drag it back here, so it goes away. And now I want to pick something different. So I'm going to take my symbol and I'm going to drag it down to here. And you're going to see all of my holdings, and you'll see blank. Blank is the total of all of the rows that didn't have something listed in this type column. So blank would be my total, total, total. So that's why I'm not going to include that, because it's really a total of everything. So if I looked at my total here, it's really double as high as it should be, because that blank is adding in not only my total, but also my grand total of all the accounts. So if I just click on the drop down box on row labels here, and I scroll down to the bottom, I'm going to uncheck that blank because I don't want that in there. So I'll see my total market value of all the stocks or all the securities is 345,000. So if I went back and looked at my data and looked at the market value total for all of my accounts, it's 345,000. So it's just taking all of these and basically removing, it's adding together any duplicates. You can also put multiple row labels. So say I want to know the type and then the security listing under that. So I'm going to take type and I'm going to drop it in above symbol. And then now you'll see I have cash with the subcategory cash. And then I have ETFs and everything that's listed as an ETF. And then stocks and everything that's listed as a stock. So all that's doing is taking the data here and saying if my type was stock here, then tell me everything under that that's listed as stock. So it's going to list stock, all of these stocks first with the sum of those stock symbols. I could also instead, maybe I want to filter this. So this top left box is for filter. So I'm going to take my type away for now. So I'm back to just having all the securities. Say I want to take my type and I'm going to drop it here as filter. So what that's letting me do is it's asking me, what do I want to see on this pivot table? Do I want to see the stocks that are included in cash, ETFs, and stocks? Or do I only want maybe a section of those? So let's take out cash and stocks, and you'll see that our list is going to get down to only the ETFs. So maybe you want to filter. So to get this box to pop back up, your field list, you just click anywhere on the pivot table. So if you click off of the pivot table, it goes away. You click on it, it comes back up. And once you click on it, you'll see here your pivot table tools are at the top. So you have options, a bunch of different options, and then design, maybe how you want it to look, what color, all different things. So I'm going to take my type and show you again. If you drag it, maybe now I want it to be under symbol. So that way I wouldn't really like, because it's not a very organized way of saying this is the name of my stock and this is the type, because then you just have them listed more times than necessary. You can also, if you do this, you can subtotal. Hold on, that's not what I wanted. If I put all my row labels back, hold on, so I'm adding back cash and stock. It's not doing what I wanted. Never mind. Okay, forget that. Sorry. Okay, another thing you can do is say I want to duplicate this pivot table. I can just copy it. So Control C and paste it. And then I can leave this pivot table as it is, and then I can do what I want with this one. So I'm just click on this pivot table, and then maybe I don't want type here, maybe I don't want symbols, maybe I instead want to know what account they were from. So again, I'm going to go remove my blanks. And then I can have my pivot table organized that way. I can also add additional columns to it. So let's add my gain or loss percent. And again, you're going to see it's counting those. So if I want to change that, I click on that drop down box here and I click on value field setting. And I'm going to change that to average since it's a percentage. I don't want to add up all the percentages. I want to average them. And you're seeing that they're 0 because this is formatted as dollars right now. So I'm going to change it to percentage. And then if I want more decimal places, I can increase it that way. I'm going to go back to the design. I like the normal design. Oh, another thing you can do is if I go back to my data, when I click on this, when I insert and make the pivot table, and it asks me if I want to put on a new worksheet, I could instead choose that I want to put it in a particular location. So I'm going to say existing worksheet and click on location. And now I'm going to go pick where I want it to be. So I want it to go back to sheet 5 on the pivot table page that I've already made. I'm going to say I want it to start here. So when I say OK, now my new pivot table is going to start right here. And then I can go drag my categories to each of their boxes. So I'm going to say I want my account type, and I want to add up the gain that I have from each of those. So I'm going to remove my blanks, and then highlight my numbers. I'm going to click on my comma sign to add commas and just remove the decimals. So then I would just have my retirement accounts 50,000, my taxable accounts 3,000, and that's just of gains. One thing that you'll notice, say I want to add numbers that are on my pivot table. So if I click outside of the pivot table and I say equals this plus this, look at this formula. That's a very hard formula to follow if you're then looking at it later on. So it'll add them up for you, but if you're then looking at, oh, what numbers is that? You can't see what cells you actually just clicked on. So what I usually do is, because I always look back to formulas to make sure I understand what they are, and that for me would be very difficult because you're having to read through. This isn't even telling you what cell you'd originally picked. So instead of doing that, I look at which ones did I even add up? These two. Okay, so instead of doing that, I would say equals, so this cell, which is B35, so cell B35. So instead of saying that, I'm going to say equals B35, and I want to add it to C35, because those are the cell numbers. So you'll see this box here is in column C, row 35. If I do that, I have the same number, but I'm actually linking it to those two cells, which is a much easier formula to understand than this one, which is telling me I picked the sum of market value from my account deferred bonus tab. So that's just another quick thing to remember. And yeah, so I hope this was helpful. And remember, you can always make changes to your data. You don't have to recreate your pivot tables. You just go back to your pivot tables and you can just right click and refresh them. Or you can, if you need to actually change the range, you just change your data source and then reselect the area that you want to include. Thanks.